Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's financial aid information session from the Finance Authority of Maine. We're so glad that you're here with us. I'm Mila Tappan. I'm the manager of college access and outreach at FAME. And with me tonight is Maria McDougall. And Maria you want to introduce yourself, Maria? Please go ahead.
Oh, sure. I'm Maria McDougall. I'm one of the college access counselors here at FAME. So do lots of things throughout the state when we're traveling and also virtually. But I have the 8 Central Maine counties, and we're going to tag team the presentation tonight.
So I'm going to do the first half, and then Maria will pick it up and do the second half. During the presentation, we would love to have you ask questions. So while I'm presenting, Maria is going to be watching the chat. So go ahead and put any questions that you have into the chat. Then when we switch, I'll watch the chat and answer questions that way. Both of us will stop periodically to see if there are questions that we need to address more immediately, or we can just wait for a couple of minutes. Maria knows that she can jump in anytime with me if there's something that needs to be shared immediately. So please go ahead and do that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm thinking that for many of you, I looked at the registration list, and the vast majority of you have juniors in high school. So this is what we really are kind of focused on in this presentation, are those of you who aren't seniors yet. Although if you are a senior, it's not too late to file the FAFSA and do everything we're talking about tonight. But it's primarily for juniors, and wonderful if you're here with even younger students. One of the things we would love to have is everyone starting to focus on financial aid sooner rather than later. So we know for many of you, this might be the first time you've ever really heard about financial aid or really, dug into the details about financial aid. So we're so glad that you're here with us, and we will be with you through the duration. So it's not just tonight. We're going to be with you, next fall when it's time to file, and then next spring when we're looking at financial aid offers. Throughout the whole process, we will be here. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to do a financial aid overview and just kind of talk about financial aid and what it is, the 3 steps to applying for financial aid, the types of financial aid, what's going to happen when you finally get financial aid offers, and some highlight things related to that, what happens if the aid isn't enough, and then some additional resources. So normally what we would do tonight is we would start by letting you know that we have this publication called Pay, and we would say, please go ahead and download it, and we would actually share it with you in the chat. Well, despite our really extended efforts, we don't have it ready. We thought we were going to, as late as this afternoon, we thought we were going to have the new version ready, but it looks like it's going to be Monday. So we would love you to know that famemaine.com, we have publications available, and please go and check out those publications. And we do hope that the new version of Pay will actually be there the 1st of next week. So it has all of the highlighted information we're going to talk about tonight, and you're going to see down at the bottom that there are specific pages of Pay that go along with this presentation. So you can find much more detail about the things we're going to focus on tonight in that publication. So let's start by talking about what financial aid is. Financial aid is simply money that's available to help students pay for college. Virtually all families need at least some financial aid to make affording higher education possible. When we talk about financial aid, we think of it in 2 broad categories. The first category is merit-based aid. And merit-based aid is the type of financial aid that's available based on who the student is and what the student brings to the table. So the most common type of merit aid is scholarships awarded through the admissions office. So many times students will be offered admission, and in with their admission offer is a, hey, we'd like to offer you a scholarship in X number of dollars throughout your duration here. It's the school as long as you maintain a certain GPA. That's merit-based aid that a student gets because they are a strong student academically and they did well in high school. Other types of merit-based aid might be the aid that you get because you're a great athlete. There's not as much of this money as people think, but it does exist, and there is some of that. A particular department within a school might offer a student a merit scholarship. My oldest son had a roommate who was a great trombone player, and at his school, that was a really big deal. So he had a merit scholarship based simply on his ability to play that instrument. And of course, he was a music major. So that's what merit aid. Merit aid is really focused on the student and doesn't have anything to do with the family's resources. But then there's need-based aid. And need-based aid is the type of aid that we tend to really talk more about and focus on in the work that we do. This is the type of aid that is awarded from the financial aid office at the individual schools. And this is based on the family's financial situation. So tonight we're going to talk about how do you get considered for need-based aid and what is that process. So all schools use the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, to determine eligibility for federal financial aid, which is primarily, again, need-based financial aid. Not only that, not only do schools use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for federal financial aid, it is how eligibility for the Maine state grant here in Maine is determined, and many schools use it to determine eligibility for their own institutional money as well. So the FAFSA is one of those applications that accomplishes a whole lot. So you're really getting a lot of bang for your buck when you fill out the FAFSA, which is one of the reasons why we want to be sure that absolutely everybody files a FAFSA. Even if you aren't sure if you're going to qualify, the reality is you have no idea what you will qualify for until you apply. And a lot of it has to do with the different schools that a student applies to. So the only way that you're going to know what's available to you is to complete that FAFSA. Additionally, we're finding that many scholarships are requiring, as part of the process to be considered for that scholarship, you have to fill out the FAFSA. They want to be sure that students are taking advantage of all of the various types of aid. So they've built that into the scholarship process. And even if you're not eligible for a lot of need-based aid, if you are ever going to borrow any loans as part of the process of paying for higher education, federal student loans are the best loans out there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those later tonight, but the only way that you can be considered for a federal student loan is by filling out the FAFSA. So we're hoping that you're here tonight, you're planning to do all of this, you're planning to fill the FAFSA out, and we just want to be sure that you do indeed do that. It is worth your time and energy to make sure that that gets completed. So we have a variety of steps that we would like to have you kind of focus on as you're getting ready and you're moving through the rest of junior year and into senior year. And one of the things that would be great if you can do this is to start researching college costs and financial aid now. When you're looking at schools, there is that possibility that you're going to be like sticker shocked, right? You know, you're going to look at some schools and you're going to see that there are schools out there that cost, $60,000, $70,000 per year. But one of the things we want to reassure you is that very rarely do families pay the full sticker price. Instead, what we want you to focus on is what's called the net price. The net price is the cost of a school minus any grants and scholarships that the student receives, because that is going to bring down the actual cost. You really don't care if a school costs $70,000 per year, if the school ends up giving your student $40,000 or $50,000 a year. What you care about is the cost after grants and scholarships. Again, what we refer to as the net price. Now, if you've already got some schools in mind, your student already has some schools in mind, what we'd love to have you do is to go check out the school's net price calculator. And every single school out there is supposed to have a net price calculator. Usually they're found on the financial aid page, but sometimes they're in different locations. So the easiest thing to do, go to the school's website and in the search bar, just type in net price calculator. What the net price calculator does is it gives you an opportunity to put in some of your financial information, some of the information that will be on the FAFSA, for example, and then the school's going to use their information, whatever they have available for financial aid, and they are going to give you an estimate of what your student is going to be eligible to receive. So they're going to take your information and their information and provide you with an estimate. This might not seem like a big deal, but for Maria and I, who have worked in financial aid, well, me for a wicked, wicked long time, Maria just for a long time, remember the days when net price calculators weren't available. And so you didn't really know what you were going to be eligible for, even in a ballpark way, until you got your financial aid offer, which is in the spring of senior year. So what's really great is that with these net price calculators, you can start to get a sense of that earlier and just make sure that you have a whole, range of schools that look like they potentially are going to be affordable to you. Now, I never want anyone to make a decision based on the net price. They are just estimates. Some schools' calculators are better than others. but it is a good way to start researching schools and getting a sense of the cost of various schools and what the aid might look like at those schools. So schools vary dramatically in the types and amounts of financial aid that they offer. So one of the other things we'd like to have you focus on is something called the percent of need they can meet. So here's how it works. When schools are going to offer financial aid, what they do first is they say, how much does it cost to go here? They subtract out what it looks like the family can contribute based on financial aid applications. That's something called an EFC, or an expected contribution. Not always realistic, but they start with that. So they take their costs minus what they think you can contribute, and then that's how much need a particular student has. So at a high cost school, a student might have a lot of financial need, and at a lower cost school, maybe they don't have as much need. Your EFC is going to be the same from one school to the next, but schools cost different amounts. Now, if we lived in a perfect world and every school could fill all of the need that you have, you probably wouldn't need to focus as much on making sure you have all this research done. But the reality is that many schools are not able to provide full need, to meet full need, to fill all of that need that your student has. So how can you kind of get to this? How can you, figure this out so that you make sure that your student has schools on their list, or if you're the student, you have some schools on your list that are going to have pretty good financial aid? Well, the way that you can do that is going to the College Board Big Future site. So here is what it looks like when you go to this site. You're probably familiar with the College Board. They're the SAT people. If you take AP classes, they're through the College Board. But one of the things that they also have is this really, really great college search site. This is my favorite of all of the college search sites. So when you go to this site, what you do is you start by indicating one of these things, one of these categories that you just kind of want to focus in on. Okay, so let's say we selected major, okay, and we put in what major we were interested in. And in this case, it's environmental science. So I said, I want to major in environmental science. So what in this one step we did is we took almost 4,000 schools and it filtered down to 606 schools. So it takes all those schools out there, and based on what's important to you, it's going to narrow them down, filter them down to a more manageable number. Okay. So once you've made it this far, what you are going started with one of those 4 categories, then what you're going to see is you've got other things that you can search for or search on. And one of them is affordability. So if I click on affordability here, you're going to notice that it comes up with financial need met. So what we really think is a good step when you're going through this research process is to look at schools that meet a higher percentage of need met. So again, what that's going to mean, if your school costs $50,000 and they think you can come up with $10,000, if they can fill 100% of your need, or $40,000, that is going to be awesome. But what if they only can fill 50% of your need? That's not quite as awesome. And you want to be sure that you don't make decisions based on that, final decisions, but you want to be sure that you have some schools on your list that are going to be able to meet a really high percentage of that need. So this is how you can do that. So you can literally just click on whichever percentage you want, and then it will filter them down and only include those schools that meet that level of need. So we think that is a great step, and something that students and parents can be doing now when your students are juniors or even earlier, to be honest with you. Another really important step is going to be to research deadlines on required forms. So in the world that we live in, sometimes deadlines are like recommended, but they're not really critical. When we start talking about admissions, and especially financial aid, well, both of them equally, deadlines are absolutely critical. On the financial aid side, why they're so critical is because, remember I mentioned that not all schools have all of the money that they'd like to have? Well, one of the ways that they prioritize who gets what is they will establish a priority filing deadline. If you meet that priority filing deadline, you get considered for the aid that they have. If you miss that priority filing deadline, you get considered for what they have left after they've considered all those that met the deadline. So one of the best things that you can do is make sure that you know what the deadlines are and you meet all of those required deadlines. Now, it gets a little confusing because there are admissions deadlines, there are financial aid deadlines, and they're different for all schools. So we'd love to have you. You're in this early. if you can maybe build a spreadsheet, or whether it's a paper form or whether you really love Excel, whatever might be the case, but start making a note of what those deadlines are for both the admissions process and the financial aid process. So when fall comes, you're all ready to go and you know exactly what your deadlines are. In with finding deadlines, so when you're on the school's website, which is the best place to find deadlines, we also want you to focus in on what financial aid applications are required. So we've already talked a little about the FAFSA. The FAFSA is again required by all schools to determine eligibility for federal aid, state aid here in Maine, and many schools also use it to determine eligibility for their own funds. Okay, so that's a given. We want everybody to do the FAFSA. But there are some schools that require a second application on top of the FAFSA. And often, especially on the East Coast, that second application might be something called the CSS profile. Guess what? The College Board puts it together, actually. So the CSS profile is used by some schools only to award their institutional aid. So they still have to use the FAFSA for federal aid and state aid, but for their own money, they want to use this other form. And it's because it goes into a little bit more detail than the FAFSA does. So what we want to be sure of is when you're researching your schools, you're making a note. Is it a FAFSA only school, or is the profile also required? Now, if you're only looking at schools here in Maine, we can tell you that the only schools in Maine that require the profile are Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby. But if you're looking at schools outside of Maine, like in the Boston area, you're going to find that many schools do require the CSS profile. So it does mean that you might have to do an extra application, but I will tell you that schools that require the profile, it's usually because they've got a significant amount of their own money. So at least it makes it worth the while to go ahead and have to do that second form. Okay, so check on whether, make your little spreadsheet, priority filing deadlines, FAFSA only or FAFSA and profile. Next, another thing to be thinking about in terms of getting ready, because that's what we really want. You're nice and early here. So we want you to be thinking about all of these things, is we want you to save as much as possible. And you've probably heard that through the years. And, the reality is saving is really hard to do. We've all got a lot of things going on. I'm at the point that I've got older kids. Mine are 27 and 22. So I'm on the backside of having kids going through college now. But, I just remember when they were younger, there were so many competing interests. And then you throw something like a pandemic on top of it, and it really makes it difficult. But I want to reassure you, if you have been able to save, that is awesome, because saving does not have this negative impact on financial aid eligibility that sometimes the rumors would lead you to believe. They are indeed rumors and myths. It's not true. Saving has very little impact on financial aid eligibility. It's income that is the primary driver of financial aid eligibility. So if you've saved, that's really awesome. If you haven't started saving yet, if you can save whatever is possible between now and while your student is in college, that is really important too. I think sometimes when we're talking about paying for college or paying for higher education, we use those interchangeably, those terms. It feels like you need to be talking in really big numbers to have it make a difference. But we talk about this piecemeal approach, this many different things or different types of funding that can come into play and help families pay for higher education. And if you have lots of different pieces, no one piece has to be that large to make a significant difference. So, I really promise you that anything you can save is going to be big and beneficial, and it's going to make a difference. And if you've ever heard about NextGen in Maine, we have a 529 plan, which is called NextGen. And in full transparency, at FAME, we do administer that program. The state asks us to administer certain programs, and that's one of them. But one of the things about NextGen is it is a way to save for higher education. But additionally, there are some matching grants available. So if you want to check that out, I think you might find that interesting. And we just run into so many families who will still say, how did I never hear about that? So in case you've never heard about it, we wanted to just briefly touch on that tonight. And then we want to be sure that people are researching outside scholarships. So it's great the money that you get through the school, but when we talk about that piecemeal approach, one of those other pieces are those outside scholarships that either come through the high school or organizations that you might be a part of, or there are scholarship searches available as well. So we want to be sure that you start looking for those now. Even though the deadlines might be like break now or in the coming months, those are typically going to be the same deadlines that are going to occur next year. So you can start building that spreadsheet now, and there might even be somewhere you actually can apply for them this early. But we only want you to use free searches. So there's lots of searches out there. And with scholarship searches, the ones that are the best are the ones that are free. Legitimate scholarship organizations are not trying to take your money. They're trying to make sure that you get money. So only use the free searches. We do have one available on our website. It's a work in progress. We are regularly working to make it better and to expand the scholarships that we have there, but we'd love to have you check it out. On that page, we also have some of the other scholarship searches that exist that we think are the most reputable. So that information can all be found on our website. And parents, what we would love to have you do is we'd love to have you join our Facebook group. So we do have a Facebook group. It's called Paying for College for Me. It's just for parents. It's a place where parents can come and talk about things with other parents. We have some school counselors and we're part of it. And one of the things we do in that group is we do share scholarships. So scholarships that we don't share anywhere else specifically, we highlight them and share them in the Facebook group so that you will know about them and can share them with your students. All right, next I'm going to talk about setting up a student aid account. Maria, do I need to stop for a moment and address anything, or am I good to keep going at the moment?
You're good to keep going. I think everyone is quietly absorbing all of this great information. So keep on going.
Okay. I will say we do know it is a ton of information, and I sometimes am guilty of I've got you as a captive audience, and so I'm trying to do a brain dump and share as much as possible. This is being recorded, and we will share it with you afterwards. So if you want to go back and listen to pieces of it, or if you want to share it with others, we absolutely welcome that. And so here is the last step to get ready that I'm going to talk about. What we need all students to do, and then parents, we're going to talk about which parents, we need you to create an account at studentaid.gov. So studentaid.gov are the FAFSA people. That's where, you know, everything financial aid is related, is on that particular website. So an FSA ID is a username and password that you are going to create so that you can have access to all of the various student aid related websites, including the FAFSA. So this username and password is something that you will create. So every single student needs to create their own FSA ID so that they can access the FAFSA and all other related websites. You can do that as soon as now. So you could go do this as an activity after tonight. We also need a parent to have an FSA ID. So when a student fills out the FAFSA, typically for high school students, they are going to need parent information on the FAFSA. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. If parent information is needed on the FAFSA, then one parent needs to be able to have an FSA ID so that they can sign the FAFSA and do a few other things related to the FAFSA. So at least one parent needs to have an FSA ID. If you have two parents that are on the FAFSA, both can, but only one needs to. So in my household, my husband and I, my husband doesn't need to worry about having an FSA ID. I was the one who took care of getting the FSA ID. And when my oldest son applied for financial aid, I used my FSA ID to sign his FAFSA. When my youngest son applied for financial aid and filled out the FAFSA, I used that same FSA ID to sign his FAFSA. One of the things I want you to know about the FSA ID is that it is connected with your Social Security number. So that's why the FSA ID is used whether you have an older child or a younger child, or even if you were going to apply for financial aid, you would use that same FSA ID. Consider it your electronic signature, okay? So if you are a parent who's applied for financial aid and already has an FSA ID, say in the last 5 or 6 years, you already have an FSA ID, and if you do, you're going to use that to sign your student's FAFSA. If you have older children, and when your older child went through this process, you got an FSA ID to sign their FAFSA, that again is the same FSA ID that you're going to use for your younger student. Again, you only have one, and it's tied to your Social Security number. Now, when you create an account, you do need to have access to a mobile phone and or your email account. Because this FSA ID is tied to your social security number, we want to be sure that when you're creating the FSA ID and you're setting up that account, that you make sure you keep track of your information, because you can't just go get a new one. If you have an FSA ID and you've forgotten all the things related to it, you have to kind of unravel those, okay? It's not like just being able to start over because we only have one social security number. So what we really recommend is that you write down the critical information related to that process, to the username, the password, everything that's associated with it. And we put together a form where you can do that. So we've shared that in the chat. The information is available on our website as well. And so if you can write that information down, that'd be great. Take a picture of it. If your phone is secure, only if your phone is secure and has passwords and stuff, and keep it in the same place you keep information like tax returns, somewhere that's safe and secure. But please be sure you keep track of this information, because we want you to go ahead and do this sooner rather than later. But at the same time, what does happen sometimes is people create it nice and early, and then they forget about it and they forget what they used. I can't remember what I did yesterday, let alone 6 months from now. Will I be able to remember a username and a password? So please be sure to write down that information.
Can I just share one quick thing? I just want to remind folks. So if you do follow us on our YouTube channel, we actually have 2 videos about the FSA ID. So we have one that's dedicated specifically to walking you through step-by-step the process of creating that. But if you are one of those parents that thinks you have one, or maybe your kid set one up for you and you're not totally sure, we had so many inquiries, I will say, about setting these up, that we actually created a video called "What the Heck is Wrong with My FSA ID?" To help people kind of navigate through resetting the password or trying to identify if they have one. So you definitely writing it down, but also we have created some steps to help you navigate through that. So that's on YouTube.
And that's when we say we're here for the long haul, those are the things we mean. So let's just say after tonight, we'd love to have you check out that video. But if a lot down the road you are like, oh my gosh, I think I have one, I don't know how to do, you can always reach back out to us and we can also walk you through that. So lots of different ways of getting these issues, potential issues resolved if you're having them. So we've talked about what we'd love to have you be doing to get prepared. But then eventually it's going to be time to actually file the FAFSA. Again, they're free application for federal student aid. We just really want to emphasize that. You're going to file the FAFSA at FAFSA.gov, which technically is within the studentaid.gov website. What we want you to know is that right now we're not seeing issues with other types of FAFSA websites, but periodically they do crop up. So there used to be a FAFSA.com site. You Google FAFSA and FAFSA.com would come up, and these do come up periodically. So we just want to be sure that when you file the FAFSA, you go to FAFSA.gov and you make sure that that is a .gov site always. Okay, it will, it'll update the website address a little bit, but it should always be a .gov site. The FAFSA is free, so you don't want to pay anyone to submit it for you. If you need help filing your FAFSA, we are here to help with that. So all of FAME's help is free, and we can help you get your FAFSA done if you need that assistance. But you do have to file the FAFSA every single year. So unlike the admissions application, where if a student applies to a particular school, they love it, they go there, they don't have to reapply for admission every year, you do have to reapply for financial aid every year. Financial aid is done 1 year at a time. So before we know it, it will be next fall. I'm not wishing away any time. I can't wait for summer. So we're going to enjoy it in the meantime and have you do all your stuff to get ready. But fall will come. And then the FAFSA, the 2023-24 FAFSA, I can't believe I'm saying this, will be available on October 1st. So just to be clear, if you have a junior in high school right now who will be a senior in the fall, it's the 23-24 FAFSA that they will be completing, because that is going to cover the first year of college, which will be 23-24 for them. I do think I saw someone in the registration who is graduating this year. If you're graduating this year, you're going to do the earlier year. So that's already out there. And you could go tonight and file a FAFSA if you're currently a senior in high school and need financial aid for the fall. So the FAFSA is going to become available on October 1st. As mentioned, we want you to file as early as possible to be sure that you meet deadlines. We don't recommend doing it October 1st because it's usually really, really busy that day. But if you can get it done in the month of October, that's going to ensure that you meet all of the possible deadlines out there. So if you can plan accordingly, that would be great. The 2023-24 FAFSA is going to require tax information from 2021. So the tax information that you're likely in the process of filing right now is going to be the information that will be required on the FAFSA. The good news is there's something called the IRS data retrieval tool within the FAFSA. And what that's going to allow you to do is using the FSA ID, you'll be able to link to the IRS and actually pull over the relevant tax information from your tax return, retrieve it, and dump it into the FAFSA. And when I say dump it in, it's literally the click of a button to just transfer the information. So it's really, really a great tool. And if you are offered the opportunity to use the IRS data retrieval tool, please be sure that you do. It's safe, it's secure, and it's absolutely the best way to complete the FAFSA. And just a few more thoughts on the FAFSA. We're going to have a poll question in a moment. So just a few more questions about the FAFSA, or answer a few more questions about the FAFSA. Keep in mind that the FAFSA is a student application, and that's a real mind shift, I think, as parents. You know, if you are parents of high school students, you're used to everything coming to you and, you know, you doing stuff on behalf of your student. When your student starts going through the college process, there's a real shift there. And so the FAFSA is a student application. The student is who is applying for financial aid. Now, in many cases, parent information is needed, but the student is the applicant. So if you can kind of keep that in mind as you're navigating this process, it's going to be easier and have it make more sense when you think of it as, okay, my student is applying for financial aid. It's my student's FAFSA. Now, whether or not you're going to be required to provide parent information is going to be based on a series of questions in the FAFSA. Most traditional age students are going to find that parent information is required, but there are some exceptions. So if you are in a situation like this, or you have someone in your life who is, I want you to keep a couple of things in mind. If we have students who are homeless, if we have students who are in foster care, if we have students who are the guardian, someone else has legal guardianship of them other than their biological parents, there are students that don't need to provide parent information on the FAFSA, okay? So if you know students in difficult or it's complicated, Maria, situations, that she always, that's the term she uses, it's complicated, please be sure that you reach out to us so we can help those students navigate the process. For tonight, I'm going to assume that the vast majority of you are going to need to provide parent information on the FAFSA. So then the question becomes, whose parent information is required? So if biological parents are married to each other or live in the same household, then both parents are going to provide information on the FAFSA. But what happens if it's a situation where, let's say mom and dad were married, but they are now divorced and they live in two different households? Then what's going to happen then is the student will only have to provide parent information for the parent that they lived with most during the last 12 months. So students are going to say, okay, as of the day they file the FAFSA, so you've got time to work on this, they need to think back over the last 12 months. And over the last 12 months, which parent did they live with most? Whichever parent they lived with most, that is the parent who will need to provide parent information on the FAFSA. It has nothing to do with who claimed them on a tax return. It is literally, which parent did I live with most over the last 12 months? Once they've identified that parent, there is one more step. So let's just say that I'm the student, I live with my dad about 55% of the time and my mom 45%. It's going to be my dad's information on the FAFSA. The last piece I have to think about, though, is dad currently married. If dad is currently married on the day I file the FAFSA, then my stepmom or his spouse's information would also be required on the FAFSA. So I say this jokingly, but we see this happen every year. If you're a parent out there who has a student that's going to be going through the financial aid process and you're thinking of getting married over the summer, will you talk to us first and just let us explain what's going to happen? Because sometimes what happens is parents get married and they don't think that the new spouse's information will be required on the FAFSA. But if they're married on the day they file the FAFSA, it is. Seriously, we can talk through those different scenarios if you'd ever like to do that. So we figured out the student's information is required. We've just discussed the fact that most of the time parent information is, whose parent information is required on the FAFSA. So it is going to be income that is going to be the primary driver of financial aid eligibility. But assets do get asked about on the FAFSA for some families. So there are going to be circumstances under which, depending on a family's income, where they won't actually have to provide any asset information. So when doing the FAFSA, we want to be sure that you know that there's something called skip logic built in, which means that depending on how you answer certain questions, you don't have to answer other questions. So based on your income, you may not have to. If you ever have the opportunity to skip a question, say yes, I do want to skip the question, because it means it doesn't matter for you. But if you do have to provide asset information, keep in mind that the FAFSA actually excludes many of people's most significant assets. So on the FAFSA, you are going to exclude primary residence. That is completely excluded from the FAFSA, so you don't even have to worry about figuring that out before you file the FAFSA. Guess what? It's not excluded on the profile, which is one of the reasons why some schools will have you do a profile. But on the FAFSA, it's completely excluded. Additionally, retirement funds, those funds that are sitting there, in an account waiting for you to retire, those are completely excluded from the FAFSA, as well as small family-owned businesses with fewer than 100 full-time employees. Those are excluded from the FAFSA. So when you're thinking about assets, it's going to be things like cash, savings, checking, second properties, non-retirement investments. College savings plans do count. But assets really have very little impact on financial aid eligibility. So again, if you've been able to save or you're able to going forward, that's a really good and positive thing. All right, that was a lot. So we're all going to take a deep breath for a moment. I'm going to put up this poll question, and let's see what come in for the results. So if a student is considered dependent on the FAFSA, who needs to get an FSA ID? Okay, so here we go. So go ahead and answer that question. We'd love to have you participate in this. Who needs an FSA ID if the student is considered dependent on the FAFSA?
I love watching the answers come in.
I do too. It's great. It's great. While we're just watching, we've got well over half of you have answered. That's super. We're so excited. Okay, we're going to give you just a minute more to think about it and finish it off. All right.
Yes, we forgot to warn them there was going to be a quiz.
I know. This is all in fun. No tests, no negative consequences if you didn't get the answer right. Just gives us a chance to talk about it again. Okay, so I am going to end the poll now. What we have is we have the majority of people said one parent, and you are correct in some cases that it is one parent, but the correct answer wasn't even meant to be a trick question, sorry, is the third option, both the student and parent. So one parent, it doesn't need to be both parents, but the correct answer is the student needs an FSA ID. They always have to have their own FSA ID. And if they're dependent, one parent has to have an FSA ID as well. Okay, I should have shared it first. So those were the results. You can see them now. I hadn't done a poll for a while. Sorry about that. All righty. So I'm going to stop sharing the poll, and I am going to turn it over to Maria for the rest of our session tonight. And so please ask your questions in the chat, and I'll switch over to monitoring them.
Yes. You want to go ahead and flip this slide for me?
Yes.
This is the one downside of like dual presenting in the Zoom world, is kind of dealing with this. But we're going to go a little bit sort of back to rack your brain about when Mila spoke earlier about deadlines. And so we like to kind of show you the importance of all of the stuff we just told you about getting ready and filing the FAFSA in a timely fashion and completing that FSA ID and all those pieces, because Mila and I are both former button pushers in financial aid world. So we both came from financial aid offices at various places and can attest to this fact that it is very important to file the FAFSA as early as possible. So in this example, the family filed the FAFSA, and their expected family contribution was 0. So basically their contribution, they are the neediest kind of family. There's 0 income assets that can go towards education. So a couple of different scenarios. In the first one, the family submitted their FAFSA November 1st. So ideally by that deadline, October, I always say no trick-or-treating until the FAFSA is done, just as a nice little reward for yourself. But in this example, nice and early, met all the deadlines, and you'll see there the totals received Pell Grant, state grant, SEOG, which is a kind of federal grant for Pell eligible students. Are you sensing a pattern? University grant. So all of those ones that say grant are free money. That's the stuff that does not need to be repaid. And so the student has maximized their free financial aid. You'll also see work study listed there. We'll talk a little bit more about work study shortly, but it's essentially money that a student can earn while they're working on campus. It is first come, first serve, and it is a hot commodity. And it is limited, much like institutional funding. So first come, first serve there, and then of course, direct loan. Our second example is the student submitted after the school's priority deadline. And in some cases, I've seen this in places I've worked like 1 or 2 days late. Okay, they kind of overspent. So you're getting some insider information. They assume, they process aid for more people than they think are going to come because they know not everyone's going to do it. And so if you're missing that deadline, even by a short amount, you could potentially be out of luck on some funds, as you'll see here. So the person still gets Pell. They still get that state grant, but they lost that SEOG and they lost that university grant. And that's because those in particular are very much first come, first serve. Still was offered some work study, though a reduced amount, because again, another one of those that is limited, and direct loan. And then our third example, let's say Jimmy was like, not sure, I'm gonna wait. I don't know if I'm gonna go to school. I've got time to figure it out. Finally submits the FAFSA during the summer, which happens and is possible. It's not closed at that point. But you'll see there that the only thing that student is going to be able to receive is Pell Grant, because that doesn't, if they're eligible based on the need, they're going to get that. But the only other thing that they will receive is that direct loan. So we just wanted to kind of put this out there so that we sound like a broken record, but that it really drives the point home about the real importance of filing the FAFSA on time. And by on time, we mean early. So I usually say, when you're doing your school research, write down all the deadlines and then file it by the earliest one and include all of the schools. That way, for sure that you're hitting those deadlines. But a great rule, like Mila said, is, before November, first week of November, the earliest, at the latest, that will ensure meeting all those deadlines. Then what happens once you file the FAFSA? So there's a few more things that are going to follow suit after this. You want to make sure you're kind of doing the follow-up steps. So once the FAFSA is processed, it says around 3 to 5 business days, but realistically, they turn it around fairly quickly. The student, because it is a student's form, will receive an email that says, congratulations, your FAFSA has been processed. And they will want to review and save a copy of their student aid report, which is a line-by-line summary of everything on the FAFSA. It will, for folks that get a little nervous about financial information showing anything that was transferred from the IRS that you'll see using that IRS data retrieval tool, will not display an amount. It will say transferred from the IRS. And that's just an identity theft protection bit. So if you're nervous about that, fear not. The schools are getting the information in its entirety, but that student aid report is only going to show transfer from the IRS. The reason it's good to look at this is it's your earliest indicator of any errors. If you feel like you forgot, you put something in incorrectly, or just to sort of eyeball it. But also scholarships, if they're asking for proof that you completed the FAFSA, this is usually the thing that they want. So they want a copy of the FSA ID. So we've got a little screenshot there to kind of show you where to find this. So the student will log back in with their FSA ID and they'll view that student aid report. They can download like a copy, so save a PDF, save it to the computer, If there were corrections made, there's a kind of couple extra clicks. We do also, again, on our YouTube channel, have a video. It's like under 2 minutes long about specifically how to find this particular piece of information. If it does tell you you goofed and made any errors or anything like that, there'll be information shown as comments that you can then go in and review. But the FAFSA, all the schools you listed, you have to choose at least one college to have the FAFSA sent to. You can have up to 10. You can add or remove after the fact. So maybe you went to a college fair in the spring and fell in love with one and said, oh, I got to add my FAFSA on there. That's fine. You can add that on. They get the information electronically. And then there'll be some notification pieces. Mila, go ahead. The other reason to look closely at this is the earliest indicator that a student is selected for a process called verification. Now, as I understand it, fewer people now are getting selected for verification than I think probably ever before, for lots of different reasons. But there is a process where the federal government can randomly select students for verification. The reason for my air quotes is because there are some things that we've seen that tend to trigger it. For example, not using that IRS data retrieval tool. So if you're frustrated and it's not working, or something happens, or there's a few circumstances where you have to put the information in manually, that's almost a guaranteed trigger of going through the verification process. But again, using that linking feature dramatically cuts down on the likelihood of being selected. And there are some schools that decide to verify all of the students just to make sure the information is exactly as it should be. But this process is replicated at each college. So the FAFSA will tell you if the student was selected for verification at the federal level. That's your cue to be on the lookout for information from each college. So the bummer downside of this is that each school has its own kind of process for how to do this, how to send the documentation, what they're looking for. So it might be either going back and seeing if you can get the IRS data retrieval tool to work, sending in signed copies of tax returns, W-2s, those kinds of things. And the school will communicate to the student generally by email, but sometimes by snail mail, with exactly what they're looking for the verification process. So looking at that student aid report closely, instead of waiting to see if the school reaches out, is going to give you time to put all that documentation together, make all your copies, and make sure that the student is not missing anything. Okay, we're at another pop quiz here. So I don't know if Milo, you want to launch it or you want me to?
You can, if you, yeah, if
Okay.
you can on your end. Go ahead.
So we talked, this is like a comprehension test, right? When does the new FAFSA become available each year? So you heard us talk about the FAFSA does need to be done each year. I can only see, oh, there we go, okay. So when does the new FAFSA become available each year? Everybody is a great listener according to these results, so that's good. I'm going to give it a little bit more time just for folks to kind of peep it. Not almost 90% of you. Great. Nobody got this wrong. You all are excellent listeners. Gold stars for everyone. October 1st. So I like to think of it as fall is financial aid season, right? So drill that into your brain. Every October 1st, the new FAFSA cycle begins. So you all did a great job on that. Thank you for listening to that. Hopefully that will make it stick a little bit in your brain as well. We've gone over how to get to the financial aid point, and throughout we've kind of talked a little bit about some of the types of aid, but I want to run down in a little bit more specifics the types of financial aid that we're trying to get through this process. So in my example slide of different timelines for filing FAFSA, I mentioned grants, right? So scholarships and grants, that's the free money. That's the golden ticket. That's stuff we want to maximize as much as possible. So it's federal, things like Pell Grant that I mentioned, the SEOG. Financial aid is nothing if not an alphabet soup of things, but another kind of federal grant. There's the Maine State Grant. So students attending a Maine institution or an eligible institution that file that FAFSA by May 1 and meet other qualifications based on need can get the Maine State Grant. Again, May 1st deadline, but you're all going to meet that because everyone's going to do their FAFSAs in October and it's going to be great. Institutional aid, as well as private outside scholarships the student is going to apply for, hopefully at length, utilizing those free resources we talked about earlier. So that's kind of the first bucket that we want to maximize the most. You also heard me mention work study. There's a question on the FAFSA that asks if students are interested in work study. It allows you to check yes, no, and I don't know. I never let anyone check anything but yes, because you want to make sure that if the student is even at all interested, that they're checking that box. Maybe someday they'll get rid of that question. At any rate, it is money that allows the student to work on campus with the understanding that they are a student first and an employee kind of second. So it's money that does not come off the bill, which can be a little bit confusing because if a student is awarded work study as part of their financial aid package, it's going to show up in various ways on a financial aid notification. But it is money that they have to get a job on campus and then earn in a paycheck. Maybe they use it for books and supplies or Chinese food and shoes, part of the college experience, whatever it is. But it is an opportunity to have some free money while they're going to school. It's a great opportunity to meet people on campus. It sometimes leads to a grown-up job. That's how I got to financial aid, or students might find a job in their chosen field, major, that sort of thing. So that's another type of free aid that the FAFSA is trying to get us at. And then of course, student loans. And we talked a little bit about that in the beginning, that, you know, if borrowing is going to be part of the equation, and for most families, that is the reality. There are situations where, especially at a school that's not going to be meeting that large percentage of need, where borrowing is going to need to come into play. So for student loans, when you file the FAFSA, you'll see on that student aid report, it'll say, based on the fact that the student is a first-time student, they're eligible for a certain amount of federal direct student loans. And so there are limits for each year. There's a need-based portion called subsidized, where the interest and payments are made by the government while the student is attending school at least half time, so it's not accruing any interest. And then there's a portion that is unsubsidized, which means the interest clock starts ticking once the funds pay to the student's bill. We want students to start there with the borrowing, if borrowing is part of the plan to pay for college. These are not credit-based. They are loans in the student's name, and there's great options for repayment, so much flexibility, things like income-based repayment and forgiveness. There's a ton more information about student loans on our website and as well on federal student aid, but we want students to maximize those. There are also other types of loans. So you might see on a financial aid notification something about alternative loan or private loan or parent loan that's offered, to kind of make up that difference. Lots of information exists out there about loans. We want students and families to do research and understand the differences between the loan programs. You know, is it in the student's name? Is it in the parent's name? What are the terms and interest rates and things like that? But that's the other kind of, we call that self-help, right? So there's all the free money, the grants, and then the loans that are on the student and family to borrow to make up that difference. When will you find out about this? The financial aid office is going to notify the student, again, the student, either by paper or email notification. In most cases, I've kind of seen first time around, students are getting one paper notification of their financial aid. And then everything after that, once they're a returning student or if there's any edits, it's coming via email. The student must be accepted for admissions first. So they're going to get that, you know, the big envelope, although I think some schools are like letting students know via text now that they're into school, which is kind of cool and kind of crazy. They have to be accepted for admission. Then there's a little waiting period, depends on the school. And then those financial aid notifications start coming. So keeping an eye on the mail, the email. Many schools will not start sending the notifications until at least January, unless the student has done something like an early action. But in any case, they came fairly quickly and fairly early this time around. So I think just being on the lookout in the dead of winter, the beginning of the year, is the way to look for those. And we cannot stress enough to have the student really be checking their email. Every sort of once they've kind of gotten into the school's system, they are going to be assigned that .edu email address at each college. And I know that seems like a real pain to have the students keep up with if there's multiple schools, especially. So we will recommend that students set up that email to forward to their personal email, so they're not missing anything, and then transition to checking that once they've made that final determination. But many of the financial aid communications are going to come through the email that will then even direct the student to an electronic student portal. So we really want, if you've got a kiddo who's not maybe great at checking email, I once had a student ask me why they couldn't just Snapchat their financial aid offer to them. And I said, we're not quite there yet. Email is still the lay of the land. So now's a good time to encourage your students to be good at checking email. Once these financial aid offers start rolling in, especially if you've got a handful of them, we want students to be kind of choosing between 2 and 6 schools, so that there's options across the spectrum of what's eligible and what the student's eligible for and what the school can offer. They're all going to look a little bit different. It's apples and oranges and apricots. They're round fruits, but they all look a little different. They all have different stuff. And you're not necessarily going to be able to tell just by looking what is the best deal financially, what's the most affordable choice, what that bottom line net price is going to look like. You have to do a little legwork. We have created a worksheet Milo will put in the chat that is a fillable PDF that I tend to like because it does the math for you, where you can side-by-side compare. So you can take those aid offers, plug in the cost information, plug in the grants and scholarships, and know before even any federal student loans what that bottom line is going to look like. Maybe you don't use our form, maybe you're really into Excel and I've seen some really awesome spreadsheets that parents have done, or maybe you pencil it all out. However it works, you do need to do a little bit of homework in terms of comparing these, because again, they're all going to look different. Just because it has more stuff on it or seems like it has bigger dollar amounts, doesn't necessarily mean that's the most affordable choice, because you have to consider what the billable costs are and all of those. So we want you to do that comparison piece. And again, we do have two videos on aid offers, specifically one on the bits and pieces and what to look for, and one on specifically how to compare your financial aid offers. I did see a couple bubbles on the Q&A. Is there anything we want to tackle right here?
We were just talking about timing, so sorry for my delay in sharing that. I was just answering the question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think hopefully I answered it for the person, but I think it's just the timing. So with financial aid, you do apply for financial aid every year, and you apply way in advance of when you actually need it, is the idea. So, if you're a senior in high school, you apply fall of senior year, you find out your offer in spring of senior year, and that's going to be the money for the freshman year in college. And that continues on like that. So once you hit, junior year in college, your junior year in the fall, you're going to fill out your FAFSA, and that's going to be the FAFSA to determine your financial aid for your senior year. In the spring, you'll get your financial aid offer. This will be in the spring of your junior year. You get your financial aid offer for senior year. Then when senior year arrives, you'll actually receive that financial aid. So it's done really, really early compared to when you get your money. So you do know far in advance what your financial aid offer is going to look like.
So it feels, and there might be gaps, especially that first year. You're gonna do all those, you're gonna hustle, do the FAFSA, do the admissions applications, and then it's a little bit of a sit and wait. It's going to feel like, when do I hear something? But that's kind of by design. We want all the pieces to kind of flow in that order. So thank you for that. The FAFSA, when you're filing, is a snapshot in time. So there's pieces that, we talked about for the 2023-24. I'm going to have to get you saying that out loud. FAFSA. It's looking back at the 2021 tax information. And then there are some questions that say as of today. So as of the day the student is filing it, and that's particular usually to assets. So as of today, what are the assets? Snapshot of 2021, the current day that you're filing. But if something changes, so if the FAFSA no longer reflects, if the snapshot, I almost said Snapchat, if the snapshot is no longer accurate, it's really important to reach out to the financial aid office. If there is, and we saw a ton of this, we're still seeing this, obviously the pandemic impact was huge, and financial aid offices have been inundated with, well, the FAFSA looked at this, but then somebody lost a job due to the pandemic, circumstances changed. they're not going to know that because you're doing that FAFSA so far in advance unless you reach out to the financial aid office. So again, this might be a loss or a reduction in hours and income, a divorce or separation, or heaven forbid, the death of a parent or your spouse, major out-of-pocket medical expenses, which I think is also a thing that after this year, people just, there was definitely an uptick in those kinds of requests. If you as the parent are attending college yourself and paying for tuition, if you're paying out of, tuition for a younger child's private school, any of those things, reach out to the financial aid office. We do have a 2-page kind of front and back worksheet about how to appeal the financial aid and kind of when to go through that process, the documentation that might be required. It's always okay to ask. The worst they're going to say is there isn't much we can do, or we've maximized your financial aid to the best that we can, but always really important to share. Now, if there's an increase or somebody wins the lottery, wait, don't say anything about that. It'll get picked up in subsequent years when you're doing the FAFSA. But any kind of reduction, any change in the family's ability to pay for college, you really want to follow up with the financial aid office. Then it's kind of going to be billing time. So there's another sort of, you get those financial aid offers, you start comparing. And as you're comparing those and making the decision and looking through, okay, how are we going to finance this bit? It's a little bit of some from column A and some from column B. So as Mila mentioned earlier, very few families are just going to sort of take that, bottom line net price of, let's say, $20,000 and just write a check and be done with it, right? Some families may be fortunate enough to do that. The reality is most families are not. So it's a little bit of a patchwork quilt. It's here and there. And so any combination of like these things to pay the bill is okay. The school just wants it paid. So it might be pulling from savings, whether that's the student savings over the summer, it's your 529, it's whatever savings that has been earmarked particularly for education, might be a little bit from that. Most colleges, I think I have yet to hear of one that doesn't, have some kind of tuition payment plan where you can make monthly payments to essentially finance some or all of the balance due. So let's imagine that the student owes $10,000 for the year. It might be pulling $4,000 from savings and a monthly payment plan for the other $4,000, and then maybe borrowing in a non-federal direct loan, like a parent might co-sign on a student private loan for the remainder, right? Any combination of those things can help get that bill paid. We have information, on borrowing options beyond the federal student loans. Milo will make sure that link is in the chat as well. There's, I just was meeting with a family earlier this afternoon and they were like, well, which one should we do? And unfortunately, I can't say pick this one or pick that one because every family's circumstances are different. Everyone's comfort level, and is it going to be in the student's name or the parent's name? But we wanted to provide you with all of the options and all of the information that you'll need to make an informed decision when borrowing. So that link will be in the chat for you. There's also a tool where you can side-by-side compare Maine-based banks and lenders. I like to be able to talk to a person or go in and visit now that we can return to places. And that's true for, even if the student is going out of state, they could pursue one of those main options. So you can deep dive there. So it might be a little bit of all of those things. There's also some federal tax credits and deductions that can help offset some of the costs of paying for tuition. So families use a little of all of this, whatever ability and comfort level that they have. So many families have some kind of remaining balance that they have to cover for the year. When you're doing that tuition planning piece, kind of come up with a plan, make sure that's a sustainable plan. So multiply by the number of years that the student will be in school, and just thinking ahead to long-term planning and is the choice that's being made sustainable, that sort of thing. We also, and that you'll see once we you get the latest version of Pay Up on the website, but we are big checklist people. We want to make sure you have all of the information that you need available to you. So there's other things on our website, but in particular in that paid publication, we've got a junior year and a senior year planning checklist. So you can literally walk through based on fall, spring, seasonally. What are the things to be doing to get ready to pay for this? I'm a person that I will write something I already did on my checklist just to be able to get the satisfaction of checking it off. We want you to be organized and have all of the information, and for it to feel a little less overwhelming. I mean, we just like gave you a fire hose worth of information to try to drink. And so we wanted to break it down into little digestible seasonal pieces. So you'll be able to have that at your fingertips when you get the pay publication. Beyond that, we have more information because we're nothing if not people that want to make sure you have what you need. So on our website, we have a ton of information that the sheet that you see that says the path to affording higher education talks a little bit about that piecemeal approach. Okay, how are we going to pay for college? Let's create a plan to do that. We also have a booklet called Planning, which can help, especially if you've got maybe a student who hasn't quite figured out the plan yet or made a decision, that will kind of walk them through what are you interested in? How do you find a school that's going to provide you what you need? Those sorts of things, as well as tons of financial wellness resources. So that managed publication you see there walks you through financial wellness, because it's also really important to keep the household finances in order as you're navigating this paying for college process. Tons of information. The videos I talked about, we have calculators and tools. We have a whole FAME.com/FAFSA will give you everything we talked about and more. Our scholarships there. So spend some time on our website. We really kind of set it up to help you navigate your way through this process. If you didn't already at the beginning, you can sign up for texts from us. So whether you're a parent or a student, we want you to feel like you can connect with us in that way. But again, also that will put you on the email list, so you're not missing out on timely information. And we're not spamming you by any stretch, but we want to give you the information that you need when you need it. Financial aid kind of runs on a cycle if you haven't kind of put that piece together. So we'll try to keep you on track as you go through. There's the plug for the Facebook group again. I did put that link in the chat earlier. So if you scroll back through, you will see the link to take you right there to join. Please answer all the intake questions. That helps us know that you're a legitimate Maine parent looking for this information. I did earlier, a parent reached out also in the chat and asked about, I've got this situation, can you help? And the answer is yes, we can do that. If you would like a free one-on-one coaching session with one of our college access staff, so myself or Mila or any of our other staff that man that, you can schedule a session with us. That link is in the chat as well, where you can go and sign up for a slot. Right now we're doing Tuesdays and Wednesdays. We have some blocks of time to sit down via Zoom and work through your questions, your concerns. Right now we're doing a lot of talking through financial aid offers because that's where we are in the cycle. But if you want to do a preemptive planning session and you're a junior parent, we can absolutely help with that. So please feel free to sign up for a one-on-one session with one of us. Again, everything we offer is free, but particularly those sessions are at no cost to you.
All right.
That's okay. I know if you navigate away from it for even 1 second, it won't let you flip the slide. We also have an incredible customer service team who can answer general questions. So if you are going through the process or you're creating your FSA ID, or when it comes time to do the FAFSA and you're feeling a little stuck, give us a call during business hours. One of these fabulous folks will help you. And if they can't, they'll triage you to one of us. But they're lovely. And if you have questions specific to Next Gen or types of loans that you see on the lending website, reach out. Again, email is another great way to reach us. We are available to you to help you navigate through this process. We do not want anyone to feel like they have to go through this process unassisted. We need a new picture, Mila.
Yes, we do. I thought about that. Yes. We've had some new staff. We've had some leave. We've got new staff. So yes, that's a little outdated, but there were still very, very real awesome people answering any of your phone calls and emails. So yeah, well, great. Well, I did just put the link in. I will just note, Maria, that we don't have the Acuity link in the links document. So I go grab that. Yes,
I will add that. I added the Facebook one too. So
yeah. So missed that. But yeah, do people have questions? We're here still. We're happy to stay for a few more minutes if you have questions. So you can put them in the chat and we can address them publicly, or if you don't want us to address them publicly, one of us will respond in writing. So. Oh, great. Okay, thank you. You're welcome very much.
No, it feels like a lot, and certainly if you are digesting this is being recorded, so we'll have a version of this up available on the YouTube. Plus we have a whole bunch of other similar presentations and information. So as you're digesting this or researching on our website, if something comes up, do just please reach out. We're happy to answer questions after you've had a little time to sit with it, for sure.
And we did, I did see a request to share the slides. I will. So what you can expect tomorrow is I will send you an email tomorrow that I will share the recording. I will send you the PowerPoint, so you'll have those slides available. And if there's anything that you need after that, you'll have an email address to reach out to, but you can always email us at education@famemaine.com as well. So please let us know how we can help. Righty.
Well, thank you all. We'll hang out for a little bit if folks want to struggle through. And if you don't want to put your question in the chat, if you put it in the Q&A, then only we will see it. So that we can, you can do that anonymously that way if you don't want stuff to be out there, but we'll hang out. Otherwise, thank you for joining us tonight.
So I did get a question if people are still on, and it has to do with, do schools, what we kind of refer to it as front loading, do schools give more information or more financial aid that first year than in subsequent years? And, if that's the case, how do you stay away? What I would recommend is, I don't think as many schools do that as sometimes you hear about. I think you just want to be point blank about it. When I worked in the financial aid office, I would try to make sure I said this to people, but if not, I wanted them to ask me about it. I wanted to be able to say to them, no, we're going to consider your financial aid, on an annual basis, because that's how financial aid works. But we're going to use the same parameters or the same information, have the same amount of aid available from one year to the next. So if your situation doesn't change dramatically, your financial aid should not change dramatically. So, at the school I was at, we were really able to be transparent about that. If you sense a school is not transparent about it, that's when I would start talking to others. I would, ask, see if you can find students to talk to. Students are great when you do a tour with them because they often will share some of their real life experiences. So that's a very appropriate question to ask a school. And again, the school I worked at, we actually really worked hard not to have offers decrease in subsequent years. That was really, really important to us. So if you feel people hedging, that's when your spidey senses go up. Pay attention to those and dig a little deeper. Okay. You're very welcome. Anything else? All right. I think we can stop recording, and thank you so much.